From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion against our common country. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation that we all love.
Donald Trump becomes the first U.S. president to be impeached twice as the House of Representatives charges him with inciting last week's deadly insurrection at the Capitol. Trump will now face a second Senate trial, but it's expected to take place after he leaves office.
President Donald Trump is a direct and serious threat to our democracy and to our Constitution. The United States House of Representatives did its duty to impeach him, and the United States Senate must now convict and remove him from public office.
We'll speak to constitutional lawyer John Boniface and Professor Keeanga-Yamahtta-Taylor on the bitter fruits of Trump's white power presidency. Then, more than 8,000 Americans have died from COVID-19 over the past 2 days alone. The CDC warns another 92,000 can die in the next 3 weeks as complaints grow over the botched distribution of COVID vaccines. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The House of Representatives has voted to impeach President Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol in a bid to overturn Joe Biden's Electoral College victory. Trump becomes the first U.S. president to be impeached twice. Wednesday's vote, 232 to 197, with 10 Republicans joining Democrats. It's the most bipartisan impeachment in history. Missouri freshman Democrat Cori Bush spoke from the House floor ahead of the vote.
If we fail to remove a white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection, it's communities like Missouri's 1st District that suffer the most. The 117th Congress must understand that we have a mandate to legislate in defense of black lives. The first step in that process is to root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief. Thank you, and I yield back.
And from New York wishes to reserve the gentleman from Ohio.
Some House Republicans booed after Congressmember Bush delivered those remarks. Shortly after Wednesday's vote, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signed the single article of impeachment.
Today, in a bipartisan way, the House demonstrated that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. That Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to our country, and that once again, we honored our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help us God.
Republican leader Mitch McConnell has adjourned the Senate until January 19th, making it unlikely Trump's trial will take place before Joe Biden takes office. We'll have more on Trump's historic second impeachment after headlines. The FBI is warning police chiefs across the United States to be on high alert for right-wing domestic terror attacks before and during Joe Biden's inauguration next week. In Queens, New York, on Wednesday, federal agents arrested 40-year-old Edouard Floria, a leader of the far-right Proud Boys group, for allegedly plotting another attack on the U.S. Capitol. Authorities recovered 1,000 rifle and shotgun rounds, along with knives, hatchets, and swords. The FBI also confirmed the arrest of Douglas Allen Sweet in Virginia, photographed with the mob in the Capitol last week wearing a shirt captioned Camp Auschwitz and Work Brings Freedom, in reference to the Nazi death camp. In Virginia, 2 police officers from the town of Rocky Mount were arrested after they boasted online about joining the insurrection. One of the officers is an Army veteran and trained sniper. In Washington, heavily armed National Guard troops slept on the floor of the Capitol ahead of Wednesday's impeachment vote. The Pentagon said it's increasing the number of Guard soldiers deployed to the nation's capital to 20,000. Authorities have erected 8-foot-high metal walls around the Capitol and set up a fortified perimeter around the U.S. Naval Observatory, the official residence of Vice President Mike Pence. House Democrats are demanding an investigation into whether Republican lawmakers gave reconnaissance tours to far-right insurrectionists ahead of the January 6 riots at the Capitol. Congressmember Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey, who narrowly escaped the rampaging mob January 6, says she witnessed an extremely high number of outside groups in the Capitol complex on January 5th touring around at a time when the building was mostly closed to visitors due to the pandemic. Congressmember Sherrill spoke to MSNBC.
I was flat on the ground as other members were calling loved ones because they thought that might be the last phone call they made. To imagine that colleagues of mine could have aided and abetted this is incredibly offensive, and there's simply no way that they can be allowed to continue to serve in Congress.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is scheduled to vote on whether to fine lawmakers who evade metal detectors up to $10,000 per infraction. This week, at least a dozen Republican House members were seen walking around magnetometers or ignoring Capitol Police after setting them off. Among those flaunting the rules was QAnon-supporting freshman Republican Lauren Boebert of Colorado, who's pledged to carry her Glock pistol with her at all times. She tweeted, quote, "I'm legally permitted to carry my firearm in Washington, D.C. and within the Capitol complex." The statement's false. Under House rules, firearms are restricted to a Congressmember's office. President Trump released a video Wednesday in which he claimed to oppose political violence. Trump read a prepared statement from a teleprompter in a 5-minute video posted on the White House's official Twitter account.
I unequivocally condemn the violence that we saw last week. Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement.
Trump went on to blame both sides of the political spectrum for violence over the last year. His statement came a week after he told his supporters, "We love you, you're very special," as they rampaged through the Capitol. Trump's prepared remarks came after his aides reportedly warned him he faces serious legal exposure once he leaves office. The Washington Post reports Trump has instructed aides not to pay $20,000 a day legal fees to his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who's been working to overturn the results of the election. Giuliani faces possible expulsion from the New York State Bar Association after he told Trump's mob on January 6th, "Let's have trial by combat." Meanwhile, a growing number of businesses have distanced themselves from Trump and his political allies. Deutsche Bank and Signature Bank say they're severing ties with the Trump Organization, as did the real estate brokerage firm Cushman & Wakefield. The PGA of America said it would no longer hold next year's championship at Trump's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. American Express, AT&T, Comcast, Dow, Nike, GE, Verizon, and other corporations said they would cut contributions to Republican lawmakers who refused to certify Joe Biden's Electoral College victory. Meanwhile, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said Wednesday the city's canceling all contracts with the Trump Organization.
So we will no longer be doing any business at all. By the contract language, we have the right to terminate contracts, obviously, if a criminal act has been committed, and a criminal act has been committed. So goodbye to the Trump Organization. 92,000 more people in the United States could die of COVID-19 in the next 3 weeks. This according to a grim forecast issued by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Another 3,800 deaths were reported Wednesday alone, and over 225,000 new confirmed cases. Over 130,000 people are hospitalized with COVID-19 in the United States. Pennsylvania said its number of hospitalizations is now close to double the peak of the spring's first wave. Arizona officials also reported record-high hospitalization and ICU numbers this week. A staggering 1 in 3 Los Angeles County residents has gotten the coronavirus since the start of the pandemic, according to new data. Early trials for Johnson & Johnson's experimental coronavirus vaccine are showing promising results. If further trials prove effective, the vaccine could be a game changer as it requires just one shot and does not need to be stored in ultra-cold freezers.
Democratic Congressmember Pramila Jayapal said Wednesday her husband, Steve Williamson, also has COVID-19, days after she tested positive following last week's riot at the Capitol when she was forced to take shelter with Republican lawmakers who refused to wear their face masks. Congressmember Ayanna Pressley's husband, Conan Harris, has also tested positive for COVID-19. He was with the Congresswoman during the Capitol siege. As confirmed global deaths from COVID-19 near 2 million, the World Health Organization's warning the worst of the pandemic may still lie ahead.
Going into a second year of this, it could even be tougher, given the transmission dynamics and some of the issues that we're seeing.
The WHO points to the rapid spread of new coronavirus variants, which are believed to be more infectious, that have quickly crossed borders and are circulating in countries around the world. The UN body is also asking wealthier countries to share their vaccines with poorer countries in a show of kindness and global solidarity. Of the 46 countries that started vaccinating their populations, only one is low income. China's reported its first COVID death since May as WHO officials arrived in Wuhan to start their investigation into the origins of the pandemic. China recently placed over 22 million people in lockdown in an effort to contain its mounting cases. Switzerland's holding a referendum on the government's authority to impose COVID restrictions after campaigners garnered enough support to trigger a public vote on repealing some lockdown and other measures. The vote could come as early as June, and the outcome will be legally binding. In Peru, health workers are on indefinite strike, calling for more financial support and resources from the government as they battle the surge in patients with dwindling hospital staff. The U.S. has expanded its ban on cotton products from the Chinese province of Xinjiang, now banning all cotton from the region and adding tomatoes to the list over fears of companies using the slave labor of imprisoned Uyghur Muslims. In Hong Kong, police raided and arrested 11 more people under the national security law as the crackdown on opponents of one-party rule continues. The detained are accused of helping 12 activists attempt to flee to Taiwan by speedboat in August. Human Rights Watch said China had an appalling year of human rights violations in 2020, citing the situation in Hong Kong, the treatment of Uyghur Muslims, and the silencing of reports about the coronavirus. This is Human Rights Watch researcher Yachui Wang.
Since President Xi Jinping came to power, the repression has gone worse and worse overall, like on every aspect of the Chinese society. You can see how the party is becoming more and more intolerant of any kind of independent activity.
Human Rights Watch also slammed the United States in its annual report, with Director Ken Roth saying, quote, Trump has been a complete disaster for human rights. In Uganda, voting has begun in the closely watched race between longtime President Yoweri Museveni and the rapper-turned-politician known as Bobi Wine. On Wednesday, tanks began patrolling areas of Kampala, largely in opposition stronghold neighborhoods. During the campaign, security forces repeatedly cracked down on opposition rallies, killing more than 50 people. Uganda shut down all social media platforms ahead of the election. The Census Bureau has stopped working on President Trump's directive to establish a count of undocumented residents. The move effectively ends Trump's bid to exclude immigrants from the census count. The ACLU, which challenged Trump's attack on the census in court, is calling for incoming President Biden to formally rescind Trump's policy. And the U.S. Supreme Court has barred patients from receiving medication in the mail to have a non-surgical abortion early in their pregnancy. The court reinstated a federal requirement that patients must visit a doctor's office or health center to obtain mifepristone, also known as RU-4086, overturning a lower court ruling that the drug could be mailed to reduce unnecessary travel during the pandemic. The decision will force some to drive over 1,000 miles to get the pill. The three liberal judges on the court dissented. Sonia Sotomayor said the ruling, quote, imposes an unnecessary, irrational, and unjustifiable undue burden on women seeking to exercise their right to choose. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined remotely by my co-host, Nermeen Sheikh. Hi, Nermeen.
Good morning, Amy, and welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
Well, the House of Representatives has voted to impeach President Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol in a bid to overturn Joe Biden's Electoral College victory, making Trump the first U.S. president to be impeached twice. Wednesday's vote was 232 to 197, with 10 Republicans joining Democrats. It's the most bipartisan impeachment in history. It was 1 week ago today, the morning after the insurrection, that Congressmember Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, a former refugee, the first Somali American to serve in Congress and also the first to wear a hijab in U.S. Congress, first unveiled a resolution to impeach Trump. During Wednesday's proceedings, she called Trump a tyrant.
Let us not mince words about what happened last week. It was a violent attempt to interrupt our democratic process. It was a targeted blow at the most essential process that makes us a democracy. It was a direct and specifically incited by the President of the United States. For years, we have been asked to turn a blind eye to the criminality, corruption, and blatant disregard to the rule of law by the tyrant president we have in the White House. We as a nation can no longer look away.
In 2019, President Trump was also impeached by the House for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. This is Democratic Congresswoman Diane DeGette of Colorado, who served as an impeachment manager last year and will again this year, speaking on Wednesday.
Just over a year ago, I stood right there where you're standing today as we took the solemn step of impeaching the President of the United States for pressuring a foreign leader to take unlawful actions to help him in his reelection. And now, just 1 week ago, almost to the hour, I laid right there on the floor of the gallery above us. I heard gunshots in the speaker's lobby. I heard the mob pounding on the door. And what they were trying to do, they were all an angry mob incited by the president, trying to stop certification of a legitimate election. It's clear the president learned nothing in the last year. Yesterday, the president said again he did nothing wrong. This man is dangerous. He has defied the Constitution. He's incited sedition, and he must be removed.
President Trump now faces an impeachment trial in the Senate, which Republican leader Mitch McConnell has adjourned until January 19th, making it unlikely the trial will take place before Joe Biden is inaugurated. For more, we're joined by John Bonifaz, co-founder and president of Free Speech for People, co-author of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. John, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you talk about the significance of this second impeachment of Donald Trump and what it means and what will happen in the Senate?
Thank you, Amy, for having me. This is a significant historic vote. The House of Representatives did its duty to pass this article of impeachment against Donald Trump for inciting insurrection, a violent, seditious attack on the U.S. Capitol to overthrow constitutional government. And as Speaker Pelosi has said, he is a clear and present danger to the nation. He must be removed immediately. So we do not accept the idea that Senator McConnell has put forward that somehow the Senate cannot act immediately to hold this impeachment trial and convict and remove him. There is a procedure for enacting emergency rules to reconvene the U.S. Senate, and Senator McConnell ought to do that. The fact of the matter is that members of the Republican-led Senate are responsible. Those who did not vote to convict last time are responsible, in part, for allowing this president to stay in office, someone who has clearly abused his power time and time again, leading to this violent attack on the U.S. Capitol just last week.
Well, John Bonifaz, I mean, it seems that McConnell is not likely to reconvene the Senate. Could you talk about what the significance and the effects, consequences would be of impeaching a president carrying out a trial in the Senate for a former president? What would be the consequences of that? Well,
the consequences are that there is a basis for disqualifying a member of the public who has held public office before and has been convicted from ever running for office and holding office again. And that disqualification has to happen here. Not only should he be convicted for having engaged in this insurrection, inciting this insurrection, but he should be barred from ever holding future federal office. And that can happen even if he has already left office. And that's significant because, of course, the president has said that he intends to consider running for office again, has suggested that he might run in 2024. And there's no basis for him to be able to hold office again if he's convicted. And in fact, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 makes clear that anyone who is engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States may not hold public office in the future.
Well, could you elaborate on that, John, the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? In a recent piece in the Washington Post, American historian Eric Foner advocated invoking that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment as a more expeditious way of getting rid of Trump and also a more appropriate one. He wrote, and I'll just quote very briefly, that invoking a constitutional provision meant to limit the political power of Confederate leaders would mark an appropriate end to the career of a president who so closely identified himself with the memory of the Confederacy and with a culture of white resentment. John Boniface.
I agree with Eric Foner. And in fact, with respect to invoking this provision of the 14th Amendment, and in fact, that provision is cited in the article of impeachment that the House of Representatives passed yesterday. But it doesn't mean that we only do that. We have to proceed with this impeachment trial. This president must be held accountable for the charges that have now been issued by the U.S. House of Representatives for inciting insurrection. And impeachment means anything. It means that this president be held accountable for his crimes, his high crimes that he has committed. So I think we ought to make sure that the Senate does its job, that it holds this impeachment trial immediately, that it convicts and removes this president from public office, while at the same time invoking that provision of the 14th Amendment. And frankly, it ought to be invoked not only against the president, but against those members of Congress who participated in seeking to overthrow a free and fair election last November. Even after this violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, you had 140 members of the U.S. House, you had 7 members of the U.S. Senate voting after that attack to overthrow this free and fair election. They participated in helping to incite this insurrection. They participated in spreading the big lie that somehow this was a fraudulent election. It was not. And the idea that they get to stay in office after having participated in that action is antithetical to our democracy and to that provision of the 14th Amendment.
John Boniface, if President Trump were found guilty in the Senate, and there are serious questions of, with the crises that are being faced from the economy and COVID, of course, to continue to deal with Donald Trump, it's not automatic that he wouldn't be able to run again. Is that right? It would have to be a sanction decided by the Senate if they found him guilty.
That's correct. And this has happened in prior impeachments of judges where following the conviction vote, there is another vote that is taken and only requires a simple majority of the Senate to disqualify the person from ever holding federal office again. And that's what would have to happen here. First, the Senate would have to hold this impeachment trial, convict the president, or if he's no longer president, the ex-president, and then pass by simple majority vote the disqualification. All of that can take place very quickly, and it should. And honestly, again, Senator Schumer has called on Senator McConnell to invoke emergency rules to reconvene this Senate now, not to have it stay adjourned until January 19th. And the reason is that we know, as Congressman Jamin Raskin has said, that on right-wing militia sites, there are statements being made, discussions of another attack on Washington leading up to the inauguration. And this president has incited all that, and he ought to be held accountable, and he ought not to be in public office any longer.
John Boniface, I want to thank you for being with us. President of Free Speech for People, co-author of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Next up, Keeanga Yamada-Taylor, Princeton University professor on the bitter fruits of Trump's white power presidency. Stay with us.
On the farm, every Friday, on the farm, is rabbit pie day. So every Friday that ever comes along, I get up early and sing this little song. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run. Bang, 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 bang goes the farmer's gun. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, 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 run. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run. Don't give the farmer his fun, fun, fun. He'll get by without his rabbit pie. So run, rabbit, run, rabbit, run, run, run.
Run, Rabbit, Run by Flanagan and Allen. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh as we continue to look at President Trump's second impeachment. It's historic. The House voted 232 to 197 to charge Trump with inciting last week's deadly insurrection at the Capitol, making him the first president to be impeached twice. During Wednesday's debate, newly sworn-in Congressmember Cori Bush of Missouri called Trump a white supremacist president.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise in support of the article of impeachment against Donald J. Trump. If we fail to remove a white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection, it's communities like Missouri's 1st District that suffer the most. The 117th Congress must understand that we have a mandate to legislate in defense of Black lives. The first step in that process is to root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief. Thank you, and I yield back.
And from New York wishes to reserve the gentleman from Ohio.
After Cori Bush's remarks, some House Republicans booed. Congressmember Bush has said her first resolution in Congress will be to, quote, call for the expulsion of the Republican members of Congress who incited this domestic terror attack on the Capitol. As Trump was impeached Wednesday, more of his supporters who took part in last week's attack were arrested, including current police officers from around the country. In Queens, New York, the FBI arrested Edward Floria, a leader of the far-right Proud Boys group, for allegedly plotting another attack on the U.S. Capitol. The FBI also confirmed the arrest of Douglas Allen Sweet in Virginia, who was photographed with the mob in the Capitol wearing a shirt that read Camp Auschwitz in reference to the Nazi death camp. In Virginia, 2 police officers from the town of Rocky Mount were arrested after they boasted online about joining the insurrection last week. One is an Army veteran and trained sniper. And a Houston police officer was placed on administrative leave and will likely face felony charges after he was filmed joining riots at the Capitol. This comes as the FBI is warning police chiefs across the country to be on high alert for right-wing domestic terror attacks before and during Joe Biden's inauguration next week. The Pentagon said it's increasing the number of Guard soldiers deployed to the nation's capital to 20,000, twice the combined number of U.S. troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. This massive mobilization stands in stark contrast to last week's riot. NPR reports despite open planning of the violent attack on social media. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security filed no security report ahead of January 6th, even though they produced similar intelligence bulletins ahead of demonstrations after the police killing of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter marches and the annual convention of the Islamic Society of North America. For more, we're joined by the renowned scholar Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, assistant professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, contributing writer at The New Yorker magazine. Her latest piece there is headlined, "The Bitter Fruits of Trump's White Power Presidency." Professor Taylor, welcome back to Democracy Now! Why don't you respond to the impeachment yesterday and what you saw this insurrection, what underlies it?
I think the impeachment yesterday is a culmination of sorts of the kind of violence and racism that has been at the heart of the Trump administration that finally boiled over. And, you know, this is an effort to, I think, reassert some kind of authority and control in a situation that seems to have spiraled out of control politically at an incredibly dangerous time. I mean, if we think about all of the things that are happening in the United States right now, with the exponential spread of COVID, with the disintegration of the U.S. Economy, with, you know, millions of people, it is not hyperbole to say millions of people stand on the precipice of eviction and foreclosure at the end of January. And we have a government that has completely spun out of control at the hands of Donald Trump. And I think that the impeachment procedures are an effort to regain control, which is why you've seen some, not many, not a significant number, but some Republicans who have finally grasped the depths of depravity of this Trump administration and really the danger that it represents. And I think that this has gotten to this point because it has been allowed, the Trump administration has been allowed to court white supremacists and white extremists from before Donald Trump won the presidency and certainly well into his presidency, that all of his comments, his racist comments, his comments encouraging violence against his political opponents, both in politics and both in the population at large, have been downplayed, have been ignored, or in some cases have been egged on. And all of that has brought us to this point, today.
And Keeanga, could you elaborate on that point, what you said about the House Republicans who broke with the party and voted to support in favor of impeachment? Do you see that as indicative of where the party might go after Trump? I mean, many have said, in fact, that 10 is nothing, that everybody should have voted to impeach him given what happened. Where do you see the party going once Trump is out?
I think given that Donald Trump not only received 74 million votes, but he significantly increased his voter turnout, even at the most hysterical part of his presidency, the most unhinged part of his presidency towards the end. He still continued to grow his voter base. And so I think the idea that this is either the end of the Republican Party or the Republican Party has learned from its mistakes is sadly mistaken. I think that the Republican Party, for most of them, feel as if they have benefited from the rancor of Donald Trump. And I think what will really make the difference in terms of whether they continue to embrace this kind of unvarnished white extremism in the heart of their party, or whether they try to put the cloak back over it which I think is an important thing to say, that even for those people, those Republicans who have come out and finally said that this is a bridge too far. I mean, this is pretty dramatic for the bridge too far to be this. If we think about all of the things that Donald Trump has said and done in his very short one-term presidency, for it to get to this point, insurrection, riot in the Capitol building that resulted in the deaths of 2 police officers. One officer was killed in the Capitol. Another one committed suicide days after the riots in the Capitol. If that's what it takes for you to break with Donald Trump, it speaks to the rot at the core of the Republican Party. And I think that because they have been so successful embracing these politics of racism, of extremism, of xenophobia, of Islamophobia, of political violence, of the idea that only Republicans are entitled to win elections, that there will have to be some demonstration that those politics are no longer popular among a certain strain in the population for them to abandon that strategy. So it remains to be seen what Donald Trump's influence will be, whether the corporate titans jumping off the Titanic will be enough to get the attention of the Republican Party, but that so many of them continue to cling to this demagogue, even after the deaths of police officers, even after the mayhem at the Capitol, is both astounding and speaks to the utter corruption of the Republican Party writ large.
I wanted to ask you about the comments of people like Congressmember Pramila Jayapal, who, along with many others like Norma Torres, Ayanna Pressley, have talked about the horror, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these women of color fleeing this mob, not to mention some of the African-American Capitol Police who felt completely unprotected themselves from their leadership as they're being chased by the mob. But you had Pramila Jayapal bringing these 2 issues together. She is the 3rd Congress member to test positive for COVID-19 that we know of. The New Jersey Congress member Coleman Watkins also tested positive, 75 years old, African-American cancer survivor, because of sequestering with Republican Congress members who refused to wear masks. Jayapal said, only hours after President Trump incited a deadly assault on our Capitol, our country, and our democracy, many Republicans still refuse to take the bare minimum COVID-19 precaution and simply wear a damn mask in a crowded room during a pandemic, creating a super spreader event on top of a domestic terrorist attack. Now, Pramila Jayapal's husband is tested positive, as has Ayanna Pressley's husband. Can you talk about the coming together of these 2 issues? Now, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats demanding that these Republicans wear masks or be fined and having those fines deducted from Republicans' paychecks if they don't wear them in the House. But both this attack last week and the disproportionate effect COVID has on people of color.
I mean, it is just utterly disgusting, and it shows something about the selfishness, the hypocrisy of the Republican Party to put these people at risk for the sake of their political brand. And, you know, I think that there's something much more pernicious to this when we think about the ways that these people are responsible, have a political obligation to make determinations about how the country responds to this virus, to be responsible for creating the provisions to mitigate the worst aspects of this virus, and are now in political control of how the vaccine is disseminated in response to the virus. And so I think that when you look at the absolutely astounding, appalling response of the most powerful nation on earth to the coronavirus, you get some insight into why the political response has been so completely bungled. With the Republican Party in charge of the Senate and the presidency, they have had absolutely no interest in pursuing an aggressive strategy to try to contain this virus. I think that early on, the Republican Party took the stance that was imposed on meat workers in the meat packing industry, that they would force people to work, that they would create a situation where there were no public provisions so that people could safely shelter in place at home, which has been the only real, known way to curb the virus. But we know that the only way that is possible is if you make sure that people's rent is paid, that if you make sure people are able to afford groceries, that if you make sure people are able to provide for their families. That is the only way that you can stay at home. And so the Republicans let the effort to take that off of the table, to force people to go to work, which has resulted in the disastrous death toll that we have in this country, all on the hedge that Americans would become immune to thousands of people dying. And that would be the way that they would get away with it. And so their personal politicization of wearing the mask, of taking preventative measures, also underlies a political approach to not containing this virus, as it has had a disproportionate impact on indigenous people, on Black people, on Latinx people who are forced to work in the public sector. And these people simply don't care. This party, disproportionately millionaire, disproportionately white male, do not care about the impact, right down to putting their colleagues, the people that they work with, at risk. It speaks to something deranged within the individuals that compose that party. It is disgusting.
And a correction on the Congresswoman's name from New Jersey. It's Congressmember Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and we're going to link to her op-ed piece in the Washington Post. I'm 75. I had cancer. I got COVID-19 because my GOP colleagues dismiss facts. Nermeen?
And Kianga, as you've just outlined, this really litany of abusive policies that the Trump administration has carried out right to this moment. Despite that, as you've written about extensively, he received over 70 million votes. And as you've also said, there was an increase in the people who voted for him among demographic groups that one would not expect to support him. So there are these 70 million people who are Trump supporters, and we're going into the Biden-Harris administration next week. What's going to happen to all these people? How should the Biden-Harris administration engage with them, if at all, and in what ways?
So I think there are two things here. One is, I think Trump increased his overall voting turnout to the shock of many people. But I don't think that the 74 million people that voted for Trump are all white supremacists, white extremists who are chomping at the bit to overrun the Capitol and kill people in the Democratic Party. Clearly, there is a stratum of that among those people. But I think that there's a more complicated set of issues going on here. I think that Trump increased his voter totals among Latinx people, among Black voters, including Black women. There was much more talked about his increase among black male voters, but, he also increased his turnout or his total voting totals among black women. So I think that there is a much more complicated story to tell about really the collapse in the credibility of both parties, in that, people feel like the world is falling apart around them, and that there has been an anemic response from the political parties involved. And in some ways, there are lots of things I think that motivate Trump voters. One of them being registering one's disappointment, disapproval with government itself. I mean, Trump has become this absurd symbol of anti-government, even as the president, the most powerful elected position, not just in this country, but in the world. He still registers as a kind of anti-government figure. I think that people feel that his boorishness, his behavior is also a rebuke of the kind of buttoned up political theater that most other elected officials engage in. And so what I think that really speaks to is the lack of political options and alternatives for people in this country. And that's why when people talk about, is this the end of the Republican Party? Is the Republican Party going to dissolve over this? I mean, people were saying the same thing in 2015 when Donald Trump became the candidate for the Republican Party, which seemed ridiculous. And the Republicans were somewhat of a laughingstock as a result of that until they actually won the presidency. And so when there are two parties, it limits your ability to really register opposition, and it leaves people to vote for one or the other. That being said, I think that there is an opportunity for the Biden and Harris administration to actually be able to demonstrate government that can be effective. They have to seize this opportunity that has been dropped in their lap because of the activism and work of black activists and other voting rights activists in Georgia that helped flip the Senate seats in that state. That means there are officially, once Joe Biden is inaugurated, that there are no more excuses, that the Democratic Party has control of the Senate, and that should very quickly open up a period of intense legislation. The $2,000 checks, we want to see them. Relief for renters in this country, stopping evictions, we want to see that. Health care, a real plan around the distribution of this vaccine. I think all of those things and more, canceling student loan debt, all of these things are now plausible. The Democrats do not have the Republicans as an excuse for why they can't get things done. And so I think it means that the Biden and Harris administration are going to have to abandon this plan of bipartisanship, of trying to appeal to the discredited and disgraced Republican Party in the name of some false unity. And instead, they must plow ahead with a plan that can actually fix the not just deep problems, but problems that seem and appear to be completely out of control in this country. They have to use this authority to do so. And, we know
we
that
have 10
from
seconds.
Joe Biden's history, that will be a hard thing for him to do. And so it means that the social movements that were most activated through the summer around Black Lives Matter have to reemerge to force the Biden-Harris administration to follow through on the promises that were made.
Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Assistant Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University, contributing writer at The New Yorker magazine. We'll link to her most recent piece, The Bitter Fruits of Trump's White Power Presidency. Next up, more than 8,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 in just the past 2 days alone. We'll talk about the botched vaccine distribution and what needs to be done not only in this country but around the world. Stay with us. World Without Fear by Antibalas. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. More than 8,000 Americans have died from COVID-19 in the last 2 days alone. Experts believe the outbreak will get even worse before the effects of vaccines are felt. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns another 92,000 people could die in the next 3 weeks as complaints grow over the slow distribution of vaccines. In an effort to speed up the vaccine rollout, the CDC's expanded its guidelines to include eligibility for anyone 65 or older, as well as those with some underlying health conditions. For more, we go to Omaha, Nebraska. On the rollout around the world and in the U.S., we're joined by Dr. Ali Khan, epidemiologist and dean of the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, where he joins us now. He's the former director of the CDC's Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response, where he oversaw the Strategic National Stockpile. Dr. Khan, welcome back to Democracy Now! So you have these new CDC guidelines. Anyone 65 or older can get this vaccine, or people with comorbidities, with underlying problems below that, as well as, of course, teachers and healthcare professionals. And the Biden decision, as well as the Trump administration decision now, to just release everything, not to save half for people to go back and get their second dose for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, which requires 2 doses for the full protection. What are your thoughts about this?
Thank you. So this really helps to balance the supply-demand mismatch we're seeing across America. So there have been approximately 30 million doses distributed, but only about 10 million doses actually administered. So I think the overall national number is 30% of doses that have been distributed have been administered. And we're seeing, again, great variability across states, actually a 4-fold variability in their ability to get this vaccine out. So by releasing all the vaccine, you take care of addressing issues where sites have more people than vaccine. And by increasing the number of people who are eligible, you take care of sites that are throwing away vaccine because they can't give it to anybody. So it addresses some of the mismatch, but there's a real concern here. So the first concern is this in no way addresses the continued operational insufficiency we are seeing at local and state level. Do they have the processes and procedures in place to enroll these people, vaccinate them, and track them? I also have a slight concern about trust. So by increasing the people who are eligible, that's approximately 150 million people who have just now been made eligible. What's not going to happen is there isn't going to be 300 million doses of vaccine that are about to be released tomorrow. So these individuals still are going to get vaccinated over the next couple of months. And so we need to remind people that this doesn't mean you can get vaccinated tomorrow. The other concern is from the manufacturing standpoint. So we've had a mismatch between distribution and administration, but there's also the concern of a mismatch between manufacturing and administration, because we know one vaccine is not sufficient. You need to get 2 vaccines. And so will manufacturing be able to keep up with all of this increased demand for vaccine? So it's not a panacea. It's not a solution. It'll help some of the problem, but the fundamental issues around improving operations remain.
And Dr. Khan, could you comment also on the reports that some health workers who were, of course, the first among those to be offered the vaccine, that some health workers have been refusing the vaccine? That's one point. And then the second issue is what we know about those who've received both doses of either vaccine, the likelihood of them still being able to spread the virus if they become infected.
So those are excellent questions. We should not be surprised that there's vaccine hesitancy in the United States, including amongst healthcare workers. As we heard from your last guest, there's been a significant polarization and politicization of this response, and often that hesitancy sort of cleaves along ideologic lines. In our facilities here in Nebraska, we've almost had over 95% compliance, so people are lining up to get vaccinated. So we need to be careful about anecdotes about who does or does not want to get vaccinated. The good news is that for people who are getting 2 doses of vaccine, recent reports suggest that they're likely protected for a year, which is excellent news about the vaccine. We do not yet have the data if getting vaccinated prevents disease transmission. So you could get vaccinated, you may have mild asymptomatic disease, but you still could be infecting other people. We just didn't have enough time to collect that data, and often that data is collected after the fact as vaccine is administered within the community. So your question is a great reminder that even with vaccination, we still need to make sure that people are wearing masks, that they're social distancing, that they're washing hands. And a great reminder that there's 1.7 billion people right now who wake up with near 0 cases and 0 deaths. They go to live sporting events. Their economies are growing. And we can do that same thing here in the United States if we use good science, if we're data-driven, and we won't need a whole lot of vaccine to drop this tragic number of cases we continue to see in the U.S. And I believe for the third time in a row, we've had over 4,000 deaths in a single day from a completely preventable disease.
The terrible fear that now flattening the curve means going straight up. What about, Dr. Khan, if you're getting 2 vaccines? Johnson & Johnson apparently now has a 1-shot vaccine, and they are just about to make an announcement about that. But if you get the Pfizer, for example, what if you go back and they only have the Moderna? Are the studies done that show that this is okay to mix and match?
No, there are actually no studies available that suggest it's okay to mix and match. And this is a lot of effort at the local health departments to make sure you go back and get the exact same vaccine. Good point also about Johnson & Johnson. That vaccine would be a game changer if the phase 3 studies suggest that it's efficacious and safe to give to Americans. It's a single dose. There's not these issues about refrigeration, freezing, maintaining these vaccines under frozen conditions. And it does allow the more typical mindset of mass vaccination campaigns, because you don't need to have a relationship with the people who you vaccinate, and you don't need to follow up with them. You just need to give them that 1 dose. So hopefully we'll hear good news in the next couple of weeks on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and their commitment to supply approximately 12 million doses by the end of February.
And let's not forget, as the World Health Organization has pointed out, of the 46 countries that started vaccinating the populations, only 1 is low income. A future discussion tomorrow will be joined by Dr. Peter Salk, the son of Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine. Dr. Ali Khan, thanks so much for being with us from Omaha, epidemiologist and dean of the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, former director at CDC. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Libby Rainey, Maria Taracena, Carla Wills, Tammy Warnoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alkoff, Tamery Astudio, John Hamilton, Rabbi Karen, Honey Massoud, Adriana Contreras. Special thanks to Julie Crosby, Becca Staley, Miriam Barnard, Paul Powell, Dennis Moynihan. Remember, wearing a mask is an act of love.